Hello, everybody. Welcome to our lecture and our talk back. And also happy Valentine to everyone, because it's tomorrow, Valentine's Day. Today, I am in for Norma, and Gary won't be there either, because as you know, or I hope you know, we have a big project which is coming alive. We are going to open a gem of a little theater this coming week, and it's really cute. It's only 74 seats available, but it's very safe. You know, all the protocol for COVID, etc., are taken care of, and Gary has done his magic. He will have done his magic also for the programmation. For example, you'll be able to see La Piscine. And I know that Claudine, I don't know if she's there, but it's one of her favorite movies. So we're very happy. I would like to remind everybody to mute themselves also and to turn off their video, because I can see a few people there. This theater is located on the second floor of a beautiful church, which is Saint Paul and Saint Andrew, or Saint Andrew and Saint Paul. And it is called the West End Theater. Our theater is called the West End Theater. It's on 86 between West End and Broadway. So you can come, there's a lot of subway, if you have to take the subway, the bus, etc., all of that. So what I would like now to, why am I here? First of all, because Norma is not here working on the theater, but also because I'm French, and we're going to talk today about, I think it's an iconic movie for us French, but I think also around the world, Jules et Jim. And that's by François Truffaut, you know, also remarkable director. And it's the 60th anniversary of this movie. It was produced or directed in 1962. So I'm very excited to hear what Max and Daniel will talk about on this movie that I adore. So I will ask now Max to unmute himself, start his video, and voila.
Merci, Marianne, and welcome, friends and followers of New Plaza Cinema. Camera angle is a little different today because I'm on another electronic device, but I hope you will take notice of what in Europe they call a quad. This is this is an original poster for the British release Jules and Jim when the film hit in England, 1962-63. I located it in a used poster store in Carnaby Street. As Marianne said, this is the 60th anniversary of Francois Truffaut's masterpiece, one of the crowning achievements of the French Nouvelle Vague, New Wave. Truffaut's third feature, made when he was only 30, is perhaps the most beloved international film of its artistically rich era. It's a tragic love triangle that remarkably manages to be cinematically exhilarating, emotionally joyous, and quietly powerful, without somehow leaving the viewer as depressed, say, as they might feel after seeing a Robert-Bresson film of the same generation. Gary Palmucci, who Marianne may have mentioned, is busy setting up the cinema, which is scheduled to open on Friday, hence our excitement. We realized a few days ago, Gary and I, this is also the 50th anniversary of our seeing Jules and Jim, or Jules et Jim, as the French would say, for the first time. We didn't know it, of course. It was on PBS's Film Odyssey, which was hosted by Los Angeles Times film critic Charles Champlin. It was presented in a lovingly panned and scanned reconfiguration of the stunning Raoul Courtard images, redesigned for our small black and white television sets. The last time I saw the film in 35 millimeter was in 1999 during a Washington, D.C. retrospective of Truffaut. It was co-hosted by the National Gallery of Art and the American Film Institute Theater at Kennedy Center. It was part of a nationwide and actually worldwide retrospective of Truffaut's work. Jules and Jim influenced so many filmmakers, and we Americans have a charming habit of sometimes taking the wrong message away from a film. For example, 1980, Paul Mazursky, a director of An Unmarried Woman, made his film Willie and Phil, which was a tribute to Jules and Jim. You have Michael Onkin and Ray Sharkey as two Truffaut film addicts who love Jules and Jim, who end up having an affair each on their own with Margot Kidder. And this film seemed to miss the key message of Jules and Jim, since all three characters end up alive at the very end, pursuing new relationships with other people. Currently at the Quats Theater here in New York City is Woody Allen's film Rifkin's Festival, with Wallace Shawn often fantasizing about films that inspired him from the 1960s. And there is a parody of Jules and Jim in Rifkin's Festival, which is photographed by Vittorio Storaro, our dear friend who we interviewed back in December. It's black and white widescreen, recreating some of the bicycle scenes with the Georges Delarue music, as we see Wallace Shawn and Gina Gershon, and I believe also Louis Garrel, bicycling around the countryside. Martin Scorsese claimed that Goodfellas was inspired by the editing of Jules and Jim, this rapid fire collection of images that sometimes you have to blink, otherwise you'll miss. The narrative of Jules and Jim, especially the introduction, when the two men are being very, very quickly introduced to us by the narrator, influenced the editing style of Goodfellas. Now, Francois Truffaut had a major success in 1959, his first feature film, The 400 Blows, which is part of our Talkback series. If you go to New Plaza Cinema online, the Talkbacks, and you can page over the 400 Blows talkback that Gary Palmucci and I did in 2020. But Truffaut followed this with a brilliantly quirky second feature, Shoot the Piano Player, which was a financial failure in France. So a lot was riding on Jules and Jim.
Un événement cinématographique, un sujet qu'on n'a encore jamais osé traiter à l'écran. Une femme peut-elle aimer également deux hommes? C'est le thème du chef-d'œuvre de Henri-Pierre Rocher, le sujet du nouveau film de François Truffaut, le réalisateur des 400 coups.
Qui c'est, Jules?
C'est moi.
Et vous?
Jim.
Jim et Jules, alors?
Non, Jules et Jim.
Jules et Jim, deux hommes, deux amis, bouleversés par la même femme.
Vous êtes deux idiots.
1, 2, oh. Une femme généreuse et sincère, à la recherche d'un bonheur sans jalousie, sans mensonge, sans hypocrisie.
Catherine n'est pas spécialement belle, ni intelligente, ni sincère, mais c'est une vraie femme. Et c'est cette femme que nous aimons.
Cette femme, c'est Jeanne Moreau, la plus grande actrice française, qui vous fera rire et vous fera pleurer.
On a été vraiment heureux tous les deux. Hein?
Mais nous sommes heureux. Enfin, moi, je le suis.
C'est vrai. Oui, on restera toujours ensemble, tous les deux. Comme des petits vieux, avec Sabine et les petits-enfants de Sabine. Garde-moi près de toi.
Jeanne Moreau. Oscar Werner, Henri Serre, Marie Dubois, Vanna Urbino, Bassiac, La petite Sabine. Un film tendre et cruel, inattendu comme la vie.
Tu crois que Jim m'aime? Oh, Jules. Moi aussi, je t'aime.
Jim, aimez-la, épousez-la et laissez-moi la voir.
On s'est connus, on s'est reconnus, on s'est perdu de vue, on s'est perdu de vue, on s'est retrouvé, on s'est réchauffé, puis on s'est séparé. Chacun pour soi est reparti dans le tourbillon de la vie. Je l'ai revu un soir, aïe aïe aïe, ça fait déjà un fameux bail, ça fait déjà un fameux bail.
Tous ceux qui ont vu Jules et Jim ont été bouleversés par la sincérité, l'originalité et la beauté du nouveau film de François Truffaut.
Now, because Gary is not around today, our resident filmmaker and film specialist, Daniel Cahill, is going to be joining me in a little while to discuss the look of this timeless film. I don't even know how he can boil it down to a few minutes, because there's every image seems to be worthy of an hour-long analysis. Truffaut and his artist technicians radically violate the cinematic language, shifting abruptly from stately compositions, hyperactive handheld cinematography, to what we call whip pans, where the camera is literally moving quickly from face to face. And there are, and we'll talk more about this, occasional cinematic or historic nods to cinematic achievements by Jean Renoir, some of the lyrical country montages of people biking through the countryside, very much inspired by Renoir films such as A Day in the Country from the 1930s, to more aggressive editing styles of Russia's Sergei Eisenstein. So the editing deliberately shifts very abruptly in the narrative style. These were deliberate decisions on Truffaut's part to create something for us, and I'll give you a sense of what he was after. First of all, if you do see Jules and Jim on the Criterion edition, there is a fascinating interview with Truffaut from 1962, when the film was first coming out, where he explains that the author of Jules and Jim, Henri Pierre Rocher, was not a professional writer. He only started serious writing after he became bedridden at the age of 73. He'd been an art collector and an art dealer. He was an early supporter of Pablo Picasso and was responsible for Picasso's first American exhibition, or at least getting his works recognized in this country. So Truffaut, having read the Rocher novel in 1956, developed a friendship with Rocher. He started corresponding with him because he was very eager to make a film out of one of two novels that Rocher wrote during his lifetime. The only other novel Rocher wrote was Two English Girls, which Truffaut made into a film in 1971. The interviewer asked Truffaut whether considering the seriousness of the narrative, and this is a serious story, the interviewer was wondering about the somewhat jovial tone of Jules and Jim. And Truffaut felt that the lighter tone, the overall lighter tone, was very faithful to the Rocher novel. This was a partly autobiographical novel by Rocher, but Rocher as a writer was reflecting on the events 50 years after they took place. So according to Truffaut, there was enough distance there for Rocher to appreciate some of the humor and even the most intense circumstances of the story. And in this interview, Truffaut said he wanted the film to be filmed like an old photo album. So we have freeze frames, we have all kinds of quirky images, archival footage, and so on. Very much as a cinematic album. The film was released in France during a tense time for the new wave. This French theater box office was down. The media were blaming it on those intellectual snobs who were part of the new wave, driving audiences away from the cinemas. Conveniently decided to underplay the effect that television was having on cinema attendance in France. So Truffaut was worried about the cost of Jules and Jim because this was a period story. He had originally thought about updating the material so that it would be present day. And his co-writer, Jean Groual, urged him not to do that. And so they found a way to still make a period film on a tight budget. Back in I believe it was the early 1990s, Jean Moreau attended a screening, a revival of Jules and Jim at the Los Angeles County Art Museum. And she was asked about the shooting process of the film. And she mentioned that it was filmed in, I believe, around 3 weeks or less. She said of those shooting days, only 2 days were synchronized sound. In other words, they were recording the actors speaking, recording them to an audio track, which meant that the rest of the film was filmed silently and the actors had to post-dub all their dialogue. It saves money during production, but creates a lot of stress for actors and editors during post-production. Jean Moreau was always Francois Truffaut's first choice. She had become a star after Louis Malle's scandalous success of The Lovers in 1958. She and Truffaut were going to make a film adaptation of a René Jean-Claude novel. But the project was abandoned in the wake of the death of Moreau's 10-year-old son in a car accident. I was not even aware of this tragedy until recently. But that project got canceled, and however, Jules and Jim moved forward. And to give you a sense of how we Americans sometimes miss the point of Jules and Jim, I recall a friend who was recounting a memoir written by the great Texas novelist Larry McMurtry. He wrote it in the late 70s, late 80s. It was called Film Flam, Essays on Hollywood. And McMurtry was recounting his 1962 novel, Leaving Cheyenne, which Sidney Lumet made into a film that was not successful in the 1970s, called Love and Molly. It was about a romantic triangle between two men and a woman. One of the men was Anthony Perkins, as I recall, and Beau Bridges and Blythe Danner made up the rest of the triangle. And McMurtry was 25 years old when he wrote his novel, Leaving Cheyenne. And he said it showed that the novelist was young, that he was writing a novel about the ultimate male fantasy. Wouldn't it be fun to have a fling with my best friend's wife? And McMurtry said he failed to understand that the author of Jules and Jim was 73 years old when he wrote that novel. He was old enough to know, yes, you can carry on this way. However, there are serious repercussions of that, or from that, as the film powerfully points out. Oscar Werner was cast in the film based on Truffaut appreciating his work 7 years earlier in Max Ophuls' Lola Montez. And playing Jim was a relatively unknown French actor, Henri Serre, who was cast based on his physical resemblance to the young Henri-Pierre Rocher. As it turns out, Jules and Jim, when it came out, was a tremendous success in France. 1.5 million admissions were recorded in France, and in Paris alone, 210,000 tickets were sold. So it helped rehabilitate Truffaut at the box office and keep the new wave on the good side of the media for a while. This, and Dan and I can talk more about this, but Jules and Jim, for Truffaut aficionados, it's a melancholy affair, not just due to its narrative, because it represents the closure of an initial chapter in Truffaut's filmmaking experience. This was the third of what I call the CinemaScope trilogy that started with the 400 Blows, continued with Tooth the Piano Player, and ended with Jules and Jim. These were part of an exciting, vibrant filmmaking style that was coming out of the new wave. Then after Jules and Jim, Truffaut went in a different direction. A rather heartless critic at the time of this Washington, D.C. retrospective I mentioned in the late 90s said, "What the hell happened?" This was a common feeling among Truffaut fields, who felt that Truffaut was going in a direction of commercialism and was losing touch with some of his more lyrical, artistic qualities from the first three. On recent reviewing of many of his later films, I realized this was not a perhaps fair judgment, but it is a powerful chapter shift as Truffaut is definitely going in a different direction that's equally fascinating, but certainly different from a cinematic point of view. We're going to talk more about some of the people who worked on this film, the cinematographer, the remarkable composer who did his magnificent score. At this time, I would like to introduce Dan Cahill, our resident filmmaker, who's also taught film in the New York Film Academy. And Dan, I do not envy your task today because I don't even know where you begin to analyze the look of Jules and Jim.
Well, thanks for the intro, Max, and thank you to all of our audience for sticking with us patiently while we had some computer glitches. I just want to add one other thing about early Jeanne Moreau. Prior to The Lovers, Louis Malle had featured her prominently in his film. The English title is Elevator to the Gallows, which is an early noir from Louis Malle, coincidentally scored beautifully by Miles Davis. Right now, I'm going to leap into my usual frame display and begin with the opening title on Jules and Jim. I'm going to try and resize this so that you can see everything the way it should be seen. I want to show you one thing here. This is a widescreen film, as you can see. Max made reference to a scope trilogy that stands for CinemaScope. If I go to my usual chart of aspect ratios, this is the widest ratio possible. It's on the right-hand side of the middle row, approximately 2.36 to 1. You can compare this to the ratio that you probably most commonly see these days on your TV screens. That is 16:9 on the left side of the middle row, labeled HD TV. And frankly, most theatrical films are shot that way now so that they will play easily on your TV screen. One thing I want to do before we leap into the visuals too much is just to mention Georges Deleruy's soundtrack for the opening titles. It is jaunty, it is buoyant, it is exuberant, and it reminds me very, very much of Offenbach's Can-Can. It's almost dance music. You can very easily imagine ladies in a row kicking their heels up. It is quite something, as is the rest of the film. I'll pause for a moment on the last creative title card, the last credit before the movie really begins. It goes to Raoul Coutard, the director of photography. Truffaut's own credit is shared with someone else prior to this. So the last credit is in the movie business means you're the most important person. And it could be a la Max Steiner in Mildred Pierce, that he gets a sole title card for himself because it was in his contract. But I like to think it was because of the respect that the new wave filmmakers, Truffaut and Godard in particular, had for him. So this first part of the film is an ode to youthful exuberance. And here we see Jules and Jim in a taxi or a carriage with the lovely Thérèse, a woman who never seems to have a problem finding a man who will give her a place to sleep every night. And she latches on to them. She is one of my favorite characters in the film. She is so consistent in her joie de vivre. And here is a scene following that taxi ride where she goes home with Jules, and you'll probably remember her steamboat imitation, putting a cigarette backwards into her mouth and blowing out smoke as she runs around the room. The camera follows her in close-up, not an easy thing to do when you're going fast, and it ends up with her next to Jules on a couch, I think, and she takes the cigarette out and serves it up to Jules. Once again, these are young adults, full of themselves. I would like to think that all of us have had moments of this kind of exuberance in our lives. You kind of want to party with them. That's the feeling that you get. Here is probably my only reference to what I call stock footage, and Max referred to as archival footage. This is a scene from the 1900s or the 19-teens from Paris, and it just establishes what the city looked like at that time. And it helps to remind you that we're in a period, decades before the film was made. I'm not going to show you all of the footage like this. A lot of it you can find on YouTube, I imagine. I'm going to focus instead on the footage that Truffaut and Coutard filmed originally for this film. Here we are introduced to Catherine, and the drawing of a mustache on her is fun, and they're having a good time doing it. But it also, at least for present day audiences, says, oh, this woman is a free spirit. She's independent. Mores of my culture be damned. I'm going to do whatever I want. And that's kind of what happens in the movie. Here we see probably the most famous shot from the film, a foot race across a bridge, and the camera is handheld, moving backwards, which is not an easy thing to do. I don't honestly know who was operating, but you get the feeling that you are with these people on the bridge. It's very, I keep using the words exuberant, fun. They're cavorting, they're frolicking. They're having a very good time, a very good time with each other. Now we move to something slightly more serious as Kathleen is leaving her apartment and wants to burn some old love letters, or lies as she called them. Where does she burn them? In the middle of the floor of her living room. And what is she wearing when she's doing it? A flimsy nightgown, which of course catches fire. Imagine if Jim hadn't been there to rescue her, we probably wouldn't have had a movie. I love this shot. This movie is, of course, we all know, a love triangle. And here is a schematic drawing of that love triangle. And I like the fact that the base of the triangle is Jules and Catherine, who may or may not be sharing a room, but at least they're alongside each other, perhaps in adjoining rooms. And above them, surveying the scene, is Jim, who is about to come down upon them and alter their relationship permanently. The camera loves to move with these three people, and it's following them through the woods, frolicking again, hanging off of trees, doing what young people do when they're full of energy. Here's another shot that I just love. I love the winding road going through this little valley and up a hill into the trees with mountains and white puffy clouds in the background. With a lot of events in this movie, Truffaut, puts the audience there in as evocative and inviting a way as possible. Here's the first of their several bike rides. You can barely discern Jules in the background. On this one, I tried to find a shot with all three of them, and it wasn't very easy. But the camera is in full motion here, constantly following these people and enjoying their fun holiday in the countryside. And this is the sort of thing which Max just said evokes older films of Jean Renoir, one of his heroes. After their exuberance, we have a moment of reflection on the terrace of the house that they're renting near the beach. And here, Catherine is displaying certain temperaments and moods that she has. And Truffaut very wisely does a freeze frame. Not the first time anyone did that, but the first time in succession where somebody was using those still frames to explain her different moods. This shot, I think, is indicative of the low budget that the film had. And as Max said, probably due to the failure of Shoot the Piano Player, Truffaut had to raise funds for his own films independently. He was not supported by a studio. And what I think is interesting is the night scenes in Paris seem mainly only to show our three lead characters. Hence, you don't have to spend money on extras, the costume designs for them, and also the locations have to be things that were there 50 years earlier. So they've got it all trimmed down here. And a lot of the interior locations are also somewhat narrow in scope, not filling the wide screen as they could. And again, I think that's a budget consideration. But as we have said several times here on our talkbacks, a limited budget is often a challenge or an invitation to the filmmakers to be more creative and inventive. And I think Truffaut certainly rose to the challenge here. This is the sequence where Jim is waiting in their favorite cafe for Catherine to show up, which she doesn't. But what I note here is that the aspect ratio is cropped on either side. It's not as wide a screen as the previous image. Now, I also note that the frame lines on the left and right are somewhat blurred. This would suggest maybe that Truffaut is pointing his camera through some sort of an aperture, but the rest of the scene does not really support that. By the time he leaves the cafe, it's back to the normal width of the screen. I'm not sure what's going on here. It could possibly have been a mistake. I don't know. So an interlude happens with World War I, and we see a lot, and I mean a lot of stock footage of things exploding and people jumping in and out of trenches. I think it's too much. That's one of my criticisms of the film, is that it dwells too much on stock footage, archival footage of a war. They could have trimmed that down substantially. But here we are back in France, and Jim is going to visit Jules and Catherine at a country house. And we see a helicopter shot. Now, this movie would not seem to cry out for aerial coverage. There is one shot coming up, I'll show you later, that I think suits it very well. But here it's Jim arriving at a train station and eventually departing, both times with a chopper shooting down from him. Here we see a shift in tone in the film, and the video does the same thing. The images are darker. We're at night inside. The camera is pretty much static. Jules is telling Jim about his disappointment with Catherine, who has left him once, returned, and he thinks she's going to leave him again. We see the hourglass in the background, which is kind of a symbol here. It tells us that time is running out on their relationship, on their marriage. By the way, Nancy, could you shut off your video, please? You just signed in a few moments ago. Thank you. This is a shot that says darkness is encroaching upon these two friends. The off-center composition tells us that their domain of light and joy is shrinking, and we see a lot of darkness on the right side of the frame. Here, in keeping with the more somber, serious tone of the second part of the film, this is a long dialogue scene between Jim and Catherine, and it begins in long shot, and it continues in a long shot like this. We look at them across a pond or a stream, I'm not sure which, as they're leaning against a tree, and they continue to talk. But throughout this lengthy dialogue scene, the camera is restrained. It's not always as far as this from them, but sometimes it's just like a medium shot, like from the waist up. No close-ups here. this is a restrained view of these people as we're starting to look at them more seriously as more mature adults. Another bike ride, this time with Catherine's third lover at the same time. Albert is seen waving goodbye to them as he goes off to his home nearby. I note the presence of Sabine, Jules and Catherine's lovely little daughter, who seems to cheer things up substantially. As is obvious in the next frame, this is one of those shots where the camera is whipping back and forth between the major characters as they're making faces with each other, something that people love to do with little kids. So the exuberance is back. Maybe, maybe not. Here's another fun little episode where the shot begins with Jim reading on the ground floor of the house. He hears some thumping upstairs, and the camera, I think, booms up. The camera is lifted upward, although that could be a trick in the shot. It's a little hard to tell, but it reveals Catherine seducing Jules upstairs in their room. And then it judiciously cuts away, or I should say descends again, back down to Jim downstairs. This is a favorite scene of mine, once again showing the restraint of the camera in the latter part of the film. This is a static shot that holds for several minutes as the newly returned Thérèse tells her recent life story to Jim. And throughout, she keeps talking, and old friends see Jim and go up and greet him. And he says hello to them and then turns back to Thérèse. It's a wonderful comic scene, bolstered by the static camera. Here is a frame that needs no dialogue. You know that these two people's relationship is coming to an end. It's very sad, and it sets the tone for the rest of the film. This is a fog shot, and I think any filmmaker would leap at a chance to shoot in fog if there's enough ambient light to do it, and they clearly pounced on this one. No artificial fog machine, especially on a low budget, could create fog this vast. So this was a natural thing, and they decided, because the tone is somber, Catherine is escorting Jules out of the house, that the fog is very appropriate. Everything is subdued, toned down. This is a representation of the letter that Catherine sends to Jim, telling him that she is pregnant and that the child is his. We see one of the aerial shots done by the helicopter with Catherine's face superimposed over the view. I think this is something like a dream scene where Jim has just read the letter and he's imagining what it would look like if she were talking to him. And of course, he's remembering the lovely countryside where he spent time with them. Jim then looks out his window and sees Catherine in her car, which is a foreboding sign. We know that car does not take us to a happy place. And she is driving around all of the obstacles in this small park, including, yes, folks, that is a public urinal, that round object on the right of the frame. They struggle over a pistol. Never a good sign between two people who have been lovers. And it leads to what we know is coming, which is this, the end of Jim and Catherine, leaving Jules to mourn, oddly enough, without his daughter anywhere in the last sequence of burying the ashes or interring the ashes of his two friends. That is the end of my slideshow, folks.
Dan, that was absolutely phenomenal. There's so much that can be referenced from this film visually, and I think it's powerful that you mentioned daughter not being visible at the end. It's a curious absence, and it's one that also occurs much later in Truffaut's career. When he made The Woman Next Door, which I just rewatched recently, there was also a child who was never acknowledged after the woman slays her lover and then herself. And it's
And,
curious.
We should not interpret this that he doesn't like children.
No,
He made
absolutely.
a whole film, Small Change,
Totally.
about kids of that age.
Quite the contrary. No, Truffaut was an advocate for children and directed them beautifully. It's just very interesting that they didn't play that up in the film. There's one other. You selected all my favorite shots from the film. There's one that stood out for me. It was a little after an hour into the picture. It's the profile of Jean Moreau in shadow during the first kiss she has with Jim. I think he's tracing her note with the finger on the nose, and that's also absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
And also another thing I had noted, when she and Jules are tearful, they're in bed together. This is when things are really going bad, and she has professed her love for Jules, regardless of what has happened. The camera is very close to their faces, almost like it's a telephoto lens. He goes really close in for that. I thought that was interesting.
And I believe you can watch the tears coming down her face in that scene.
Yes,
I mean, it's really,
yes, you can.
It's the real McCoy. No eye drops for her. It's a very moving scene, and it is a very moving film. It's hard to just stop watching the movie and not think and talk about it.
Yet, despite the I wouldn't say ghoulish, but the rather serious death-obsessed conclusion, you've got cremation and ashes and bones. It's something very uplifting as well. It's I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to put
the music. The music at the end is kind of almost cheerful again, taking you back. Mm-hmm. And you watch the way Jules is walking down the hill. He's almost got some youthful energy again. Mm-hmm. Maybe he thinks it's okay to get rid of these two bothersome people and start over again with somebody else. I don't know. But
you're right. The Delarue score definitely adds to the power or our emotional response to that moment. A little bit about Delarue. He composed over 350 scores for film and television. In addition to his films for Truffaut, he worked with Jean-Luc Godard on Contempt. He did the score for Alain René on Hiroshima Mon Amour. We discussed his work for Bertolucci in The Conformist in 1900. He scored Louis Malle's Viva Maria. He did scores for Claude Sauté, Francois Reichenbach, Philippe de Broca, even Ken Russell, Women in Love. Before, unfortunately, going to Hollywood and hooking up with some far lesser talents. But he was rightly considered the Mozart of cinema. I mean, just absolutely an extraordinary talent. And Coutard was actually a combat photographer during World War II. He was a combat photographer for Life magazine and for Paris Match, and then entered films through work as a newsreel photographer and documentarian, applying those techniques to his Nouvelle Vague films. So. His shooting
as a war cameraman may explain how he was able to run backwards on that chase across the bridge and handhold the camera. If it was indeed him and not another operator, I don't know. But if you can shoot a battle, you can pretty much shoot three people running across a bridge, I would think.
And they were using portable equipment at that time, which helped the Nouvelle Vague to take to the streets like that. And what can we say about Jean Moreau, except that she is she's a tribute to the cinema. I mean, the talent that this woman worked with.
I just happened to glance at her filmography.
It's chilling, isn't it?
Over 400 credits. Okay.
Oh, is it that many? Okay.
I think that may have topped John Carradine, who had somewhere in the 300s. I don't know. This is an an item for debate for decades, but she was very popular. And
the filmmaking talent this woman worked with. I mean, she had actually started out in films when she was 21 years of age in 1949. She was making them 2 years prior to her death. in 2015 was her most recent films. She got attention in Jacques Becker's Touchez pas au Gillespie with Jean Gabin. And then you mentioned the Louis Malle films, but she's going to go on to make films for Roger Vadim, the first Les Liaisons Dangereuses, 4 films, one of which wasn't released, by Orson Welles, including The Immortal Story and Chimes at Midnight, which we've discussed. She worked with Joseph Losey on Monsieur Klein and Eva. Buñuel's Diary of a Chambermaid, which is brilliant. She was even in one of Fassbinder's last films, Poirot. I mean, it's absolutely astonishing. And in the 70s, she even directed a couple of films in her own right, such as Lumiere and The Adolescent. And Oscar Werner, boy, we went in a whole different direction. He starts off promisingly. After Jules and Jim, he goes Hollywood a little bit. He's appearing in The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, Ship of Fools from Stanley Kramer. Then there are problems. And by the time he's making Fahrenheit 451 Truffaut, he's not in the best of shape. And the two of them are getting along terribly. And very, very symbolically, Werner died 2 days after Truffaut in 1984. Make of that what you will. She co-wrote the lyrics with her husband after they had gotten separated.
Yeah.
So they were still on good terms enough to write the.
I can see that. One other musical note for people who are curious and would like to pursue this. There is a CD, which I fear is out of print, but it is titled Georges Deleruy's Music for the Films of Francois Truffaut. I own it. I bought it a long time ago. You might be able to find it. It's worth looking for because the music is gorgeous. And they also use the wonderful Vivaldi-esque theme from Day for Night, which is impossible to listen to only once. You really want to hear it over and over. So Georges Deleruy's music for the films of Francois Truffaut. Look for it if you can.
My next presentation for New Plaza is going to be on Bob Fosse and Gwen Verdon. So the real Fosse, Verdon, and all that jazz. We're going to be, this is anticipation of our next talk back, which will be celebrating the 50th anniversary of Fosse's Cabaret.
Something I noticed, and I don't think it was stock footage, is they pay homage to the Roundhay Garden Le Prince footage, and they also pay a lot of homage to some Lumiere footage, like the train coming in the station. Instead of going up the lift in the Eiffel Tower, they're going down. I don't think those are stock footage because they would be really horrible images if they were, and they look newer to me. So just something I thought I
honestly don't know, but
yeah,
it's the sort of thing you usually have to pay a fee for in order to include into your film.
I don't think it was stock footage. I think it was stuff they shot, but we do have some hands now. Nina?
I just wanted to add, Laurie, I had one of my creepy flashbacks to, there was another time this film was shown on public television. This time it was the late 70s. There was a film teacher from I believe, Texas, Benjamin Dunlap, who showed Jules and Jim. And he referenced a scene where I think it's Jules who was sawing some wood outside their home. And he said he felt that was a reference to F.W. Murnau's Sunrise, great 1927 silent film, which opens in the countryside. I just remembered it.
Yeah, I thought there was a lot of homage there, and I didn't think it was stock footage because it's such old footage that it would be like, horrible to look at. But we have Nina, who is now
hello, Nina.
Unmuted.
Hello there. I was thinking about the feminist aspect. I mean, it was 1962. Could this be considered almost an early feminist viewpoint? The fact that she was such a liberated woman sexually, and she sort of controlled things. It was a rather daring idea. We didn't yet have Betty Friedan at that period. So it was a rather radical idea of a woman's life, that she should have this level of freedom. You didn't see that much kind of female liberation or freedom.
You're absolutely right, Nina. That's correct. This was sort of a dash of cold water in the face for a lot of audiences of more traditional means. I would add just a parenthetical note. Jules and Jim was banned in Italy, not for very long. I think they probably had to make some cuts or something, negotiate with the Pope, but there are people who viewed this film as dangerous. And imagine if it had had actual nudity and sex in it, it would have been banned almost everywhere in that era.
Yeah.
Because the previous year in Shoot the Piano Player, there was nudity. And so it's interesting that this one did not contain that.
I think that's also a mark of the Nouvelle Vague is that, if you look at Breathless, it seems like it's very chauvinistic, but Patricia controls everything, so I think that's sort of a theme of the new wave, is this awakening of women's sexuality, and that they're the ones who can, control the situation.
Plus, there's that fascinating scene as they're walking along the Seine at night after seeing the Swedish play, where Jules is quoting from Charles Baudelaire, who's these awful quotes about women, and the camera is on Catherine as she's walking along. You're wondering what is going on in her mind right now as she's listening to these Baudelaire quotes, and then she just randomly jumps into the Seine. And that was Jean Moreau who made the stunt, by the way.
She felt so sullied by Baudelaire's poetry that she had to bathe in the river.
That's the best analysis of that scene that I've come across, Dan. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great, Nina. Thank you.
Thank you. Marianne Lamine, would you like to unmute and start your video?
Yes, I don't need the video. Thank you.
Okay.
I wanted to talk a little bit or ask you experts about the narration, the narrator. It's almost, in my mind, Hemingway-esque. It's very brief, very direct, and very poetic at the same time. And at the end, you have these wonderful lines. Their bodies were entangled in the weeds. And I thought I'd like to ask both of you to just comment on that, because I was very struck by it. This is a movie I've seen numerous times over the years. And
I wish I had read the novel.
It was worth talking about the narrator a little bit and why Truffaut did the film that way.
Dan, that quote that she just read to us, was that something that you think was taken from the novel?
Probably. I read this when it was first published in the early 80s in English here in the States. in an Avon paperback edition. No hardcover for this. It was French. So
Put it in a brown wrapper.
yes, exactly. I'd read it 40 years ago, and I started reading it now, and it is indeed very much like the narration. Short, descriptive sentences with some power to them. And then I didn't get very far into it this time. I had other tasks competing, but I do remember that it reading like the script of the film.
We have someone here who's saying that for their money, the film is much better than the book.
Yeah, I'm not going to
Don't hear that very often.
That's why I quoted it, because you don't. Now, you're saying, what year did the book come out? Was the book based on the movie? Or
No, the movie was based on, the book was early 50s.
Yes,
Okay,
1953, and it was eventually published in 82, I believe, in the States in English.
Gotcha.
And it became a bestseller after the film came out. So they reprinted it. And there were apparently merchandising tie-ins with T-shirts and caps and things as well, which was also unusual for a French art film.
Yeah, really.
I have one more book to hold up.
Okay.
Maybe you had this edition, Max. I don't know.
Long time ago.
Long time ago. And again, the binding is almost falling apart here.
What is
but
that,
if you can
Daniel?
find it.
There's a series published of, it's almost continuity. It's really the continuity of the film in script form and written form.
So like the
much
script
so.
notes from the script soup?
It's describing the film and then having the dialogue.
Interesting.
They did that for a series of, this was a video, of course, where it enabled us to study the movie by looking it on the page.
And abundantly illustrated with stills, by the way. So this was a very good series. I'm sure it's out of print, but if you're roaming around in an old bookshop, as some of us like to do, you might find them.
Okay, we have a question from Jean Aaron. Jean, if you could unmute yourself and start your video.
Hello, Jean.
Jane?
I could imagine, this is, of course, a very French film, and there's no way anything like that would be shown in the US in its day. But was it shocking for some French population as well?
First of all, it was shown in the United States. It was imported here and was very successful in specialized cinemas.
But in the
Probably
same period?
couldn't have been produced by a Hollywood studio and set in the United States in 1962. There would have been issues. But as far as the French response.
Can I say something?
Yes, please,
yeah,
I was hoping you would chime in, Marianne.
Please
We
tell
were
us.
not shocked at all. It was,
Why does that not surprise us, Marianne?
no, I mean, it was just a beautiful, poetic movie, and everybody liked it. There was not even one person who would say something, that it was shocking.
But most, yeah. Well, I don't see that an American sensibility, although it could be remade today, I think in today's world.
I brought up the point when we were doing rehearsal on Friday that it kind of reminded me of Paint Your Wagon, where they have the woman and the two men who kind of, the older guy marries her, and then Clint Eastwood and her kind of, they all live together. And what did you say the quote was, Max? So I guess there'll be 3 for dinner, something like that.
Oh no, I think you said that quote for me.
Okay.
Or maybe Gary did. There
you go. It was Gary. So and that was what, 70s?
That was 1969, and then Willie and Phil from Paul Mazursky was 1980, and then Heaven's Gate came out in 1980, and that also had a bit of a romantic triangle between Isabelle Huppert's character and the Chris Christopherson and
I think once we see the
legislation
of the Hays Code.
So there was some, it's a little bit more allowable, and they're not making as big. Although, in fairness, we have to give credit where credit was due. I can't believe that the Lubitsch reference was lost on Truffaut. He did star. Yeah, no, that's true. Lubitsch did make a film, not one of his best ones, on Noel Coward's Design for Living, which is Gary Cooper, Frederick March, Miriam Hopkins, kind of a love triangle. swinging thing from 1933. So that was before the censorship code was enforced here in the United States.
It's interesting that in all of these triangles we're citing, the hypotenuse is always the woman. It's usually two men and a woman.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe this is the traditional formula. Do they do it that way all the time?
That's because we're trying to avoid referencing Randall Kleiser's Summer Lovers.
Oh,
in the early 80s.
Wow. Okay.
Which doesn't get, no, but you're right, Dan. You're right. It usually is, at least in these examples, it's two men and one woman.
Yeah.
And again, it came to the US, people were interested in it.
Absolutely, because Truffaut was already well known here because of his two previous films, and he was great at work. He really knew how to work the market and deal with distributors and publicists and the media, and it absolutely came here and received ecstatic reviews.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So there's hope for us yet.
Truffaut was a very shrewd businessman.
Yes, he was.
He didn't always succeed, but he was thinking always, trying to calculate how the movie would do and what to do about that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Gene.
Sure.
Kathleen Blanchard, if you could raise your hand, if you could unmute yourself and start your video. Thank you.
Hey, everybody.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hello. Hello. Hi. You know, I was, first of all, I am so excited about the new theater that's opening. I so wish I could be there, and I can't wait to visit. I will be there, that's for sure. Back to the earlier comment from the first speaker who was saying that if there was nudity, it would be banned. Actually, if there was female nudity, I don't think it would have been banned. I think there's a bit of a double standard going on here. I was wondering, in this triangle, even though the film is about a triangle, it seems to me that there's all these dualities and tensions between dualities throughout the whole film. The relationship between the two men, the relationship of the men and Catherine, and then the duality and tensions between her being loved so unconditionally by Jules, but she doesn't want him. But then she loves Jim and he doesn't want her. So all that tension, right? And then I was also noticing the double standard that Jim can have multiple women, and that just seems okay. That's like nothing to remark about. Whereas she has multiple men, and suddenly that's a scandal. A bit of a double standard. Of course.
This was the era of the double standard. This is 60 years ago. So, we have
Although in fairness, in D.W. Griffith's Way Down East in 1920, the opening credits take us to task for a double standard, whereas men are allowed to frolic and women are chastised for that. And this was 1920, so the double, it had been lasting for a while, but yes.
Oh, it still lasts. What are you kidding?
Yeah, I was thinking
to this day.
Oh no, we don't have those issues anymore. Come on.
And I was wondering, the two women who have multiple women, Therese and Catherine, right? Therese is sort of like loony, and Catherine is a bit unstable, right? And so I was just thinking another thing, like Jim can be like this steady guy who's got multiple women, but when the women have multiple men, I was like, something kind of wrong.
Well, I mean, she really does. I mean, look, she just meets a guy randomly and walks out of the bar with him. I mean, that's a little intense for me, but
a la Jules. But anyway, Daniel, I didn't know whether or not you addressed this in your montage of photos. I really enjoy that a lot. Did you speak about, or would you speak about those few instances where there was a freeze frame, and it was really, it was remarkable to me. I thought, oh, a memory is being made here.
Well, yeah, this was the
he
scene
did talk
where
about that.
Catherine.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it.
I did show one of her freezes, and I would just go back to the very end of Truffaut's first feature. We're looking at Jean-Pierre Léaud as Antoine Doinel, Truffaut's alter ego, frozen in a frame on the beach, looking at us confrontationally in the camera. That's a powerful ending for any film. And I'm sure Francois decided, yeah, let's do that again. It works. It was not pioneering, by the way. I want to say that. This is not the first time someone did a freeze frame, but it was very effective, and it was in keeping with this sort of kaleidoscope of visual technique that he was using throughout the film.
I see. I think. Do you think it had any particular meaning when he did it?
It just showed, well, one way to look at it is to look at Catherine as kind of a fractured personality. I mean, she does have some serious psychological issues, and she has a lot of different moods, and maybe he was just freezing it there to say, hey, pay attention to this. This will play out in the rest of the film.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks a
Beautifully
lot.
stated. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Joel,
See you guys.
you're up
Thank you.
next.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can. Hello.
Good.
Two things. One, I put them in the chat, but in case you didn't see it, is that about an hour and 5 minutes into the movie, there's a really neat little thing. You recall that Jules is writing a book about dragonflies, and he's also talking about writing another book about where the characters are insects, and there's artwork with insects on the walls and on his desk. So he's become an entomologist, and there's the scene where where Jim and Catherine are embracing in front of the window for the first time, and there's a little insect crawling on the glass. And that was, and you could view that as like an interloper or the third member of the triangle. And that was actually an accident that when they were filming it, but they decided to leave it in the film, which is obviously a great thing to do. Because once you notice it, you cannot fail to see it a second and a third time.
Oh, there are wonderful little bits of serendipity that happen in making a film. I was just citing The Foggy Day when they shot Jim's departure from the house, but I don't know how many of you remember The Duelists, Ridley Scott's first film. Mm-hmm. There is a wonderful scene where Keith Carradine is starting to kiss Christina Rains. They're each leading a horse, and the horses start to kiss each other in the background. You can't buy that stuff, and you got to keep it in. So yeah, the insect, what was it, a butterfly? I'm trying to remember.
You can't really tell. It's a little thing crawling around. You can see it's in a silhouette like the characters.
Right. Yeah. That's great, Joel. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Joel.
Time you see it, for those of you going to go look at it, watch it now. The first time you'll see it, it's behind Catherine Deneuve's head, and then and it's kind of indistinct, but it's definitely there because you see it moving. So obviously, movement is much more obvious to the eyes than if I just showed you a still of it. Sure. But then when they're about to kiss, and Jim is kind of caressing her face with his hand, and he takes his hand away, and they're just about to kiss, you'll see that the insect appears almost to crawl into her mouth.
Right. Yeah. It goes behind her head, but the illusion is there.
And the other thing I wanted to mention, you talked about some of the camera work. I mean, I guess they didn't have a steady cam in those days, but it's amazing what they could accomplish. I mean, in their use of the subjective camera, like when they're running through the fields and he spots all these little different items on the grass, on the ground. It's just amazing photography. And a couple other times he does some subjective camera work, and it really puts you as the viewer into the film.
You could almost say that the camera is another character in this film. The audience is very participatory. And that's a work of master craftsmen making that happen. So you feel you're with these people and having a good or bad time.
Wasn't that sort of the whole point of the French New Wave, is to get the audience to be more participatory and not just this, droned, feed them the sugar and then tie everything up. And, the whole idea was to get the audience to think more and be more,
sure.
Inject their opinions up on the screen, so
I think that sort of style developed over the course of the New Wave as they influenced each other. Oh, you can do a shot like that? Let me try this one. So,
and it was
originally it would have been based on budgetary limitations. They didn't have tracking equipment and dollies, so they had to do handheld, and they said, hey, wait a minute, we like this style. So,
or they would rent a wheelchair.
Right, exactly.
Wheelchairs, doorway dollies, the tripod on them.
By the way, just Joel was right. It was 15 more years before the Steadicam came into use.
Yeah, 75 was when it was discovered and it became popular with The Shining, I believe.
I think they might have used a bicycle or tricycle in this movie, but I can't swear to it.
Sure. I mean, people have used all sorts of things.
Yeah.
There was the one scene when they're riding the bicycle, sort of harkened to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid when they're riding.
Well, okay. Butch Cassidy definitely was quoting Jules and Jim in that Burt Bacharach montage.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. That's another
Even the
example.
costuming is almost identical.
Yeah.
That was an attempt.
Yeah.
There crudely.
Thank you so much, Joel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joel.
Barry, you're next, and we'll finish up with Marianne, unless anyone else has any questions. Barry, can you unmute and start your video?
Okay. There we go. Let me
hear you.
All right. Let me just see if you can see me. There you are.
There you are.
Hi, Barry.
Hello.
Barry.
Hello, guys. Another wonderful conversation. Daniel only a few minutes ago referenced what I was thinking about throughout seeing the film and this discussion, and that is putting aside her openness towards sexuality and her modern take on multiple lovers and all of that. Was she not bipolar? Does the book not reference her mental instability? I mean, we haven't addressed that much until Daniel just referenced it.
You know what's sad about,
recently.
Sorry, you got me thinking, Barry.
Go ahead.
You watch a lot of these films, whether it's a movie like Jules and Jim, or maybe it's a film noir, a drama, whether the protagonist, the troubled protagonist, is male or female. At the time, they didn't really know what we know now, and there's when you see a character behaving in a certain way. Now we know, oh, this is a case of bipolar disorder, or other terms, but I think they were not as far along in that at the time, really understand her disorder, because clearly, yes, she was a seriously troubled woman.
Unstable, for sure.
Yeah,
definitely. I think if you're driving your lover off a bridge in her car, yeah, that qualifies as unstable in my book.
Or pulling a gun on them, or jumping
Pulling
in
a gun.
the water.
And I had
unexplained.
forgotten the guns. I had totally forgotten that where she pulls the gun on him, even though that's a very important scene.
Just to answer your question, Barry, I can't speak literally right now for having recently read the novel, but I remember thinking that it was like a script for the film, that Truffaut was lifting dialogue from the page. So I do not think that the book took time for an omniscient narrator to tell us how crazy she was. Okay, it was very much demonstrated in the scenes and the dialogue, and you got what was going on, but it did not editorialize about it at all.
Interesting. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Barry.
One more question from Nina, and then we'll go to Marianne. Nina, unmute and start your video if you'd like.
Yes. I'm trying to start the video.
Well, we can hear you, Nina. You can go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking about the bipolarity also, especially after reading about Vivian Lee's bipolarity and Vivian Lee's behavior. I was reading about it recently, and she had a very similar pattern of behavior. And it just stuck in my mind after seeing Jules and Jim about that behavior. And I know someone in my own family that has hypersexuality and all of that. It goes along. It just, and Vivian Leigh, it was mentioned in the article about her diagnosis of bipolarity and her many lovers, her insatiable appetites and all of that. It just brought that up in my mind that back in those days, people wouldn't think about it so much as a mental illness, but.
Well, we also don't want to exclude the late, great Mary Astor from this roster. She did pretty much every guy in Hollywood, from what I understand. And I'm proud to say I'm only 1 degree of separation from her. We have a mutual acquaintance, I'll say. I won't name names, but yeah, she was quite an active lady.
Yeah.
Well, the not only the women, but even the men in Truffaut's narratives, they all are very, very troubled, and there's a lot of bipolarity and a lot of the other women in his films. But we see that in some of the male characters as well.
Yeah.
It makes for more compelling narratives.
Yeah.
We have a couple more hands been raised. Amazing
Okay.
Grace. Can you unmute and start your video? Or you can just unmute.
We can go right to Mary. Oh, there we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Okay. I look at her, what you all are calling her craziness or her bipolarity. I look at it in the context of the movie and in the context of Catherine's story as a metaphor for her rebelliousness and her inability to express what may be her artistic ambitions or her social ambitions in any other way, but to be self-destructive.
Powerfully stated, and I also don't think the presence of World War I can be overstated here. I think that's, of course, some of her behavior is prevalent before the war, but it's just the impact that had on anyone who had to live through it is certainly going to affect their behavior too.
It is interesting how Jules and Jim are both rather nonchalant when they talk about the war. Now, this was a common feature of male society, that veterans just didn't talk about the war and how horrible it was. But all they said is, gee, I was afraid I was going to kill you. Ha ha ha, you won, we won. It was odd.
But there is that one scene where they're starting to discuss the war, and Catherine's in the background talking about wines, different brands of wines.
Yes.
And she's almost interfering with their discussion, and then she wants them to chase her outside. So it would have been. I was curious to know where the two men were going to go in their conversation before that happened.
And we were never going to find out.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Jean, Aaron, one last question.
Hi, I'm back. It was a great moment when it was kind of the breakup scene right before she pulled the gun on him, where he got out of bed and she was in bed and her face just turned to real angry evil, like the real her was right there. And she said something about, I don't love you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that? I mean, that my husband and I both thought it was really spine chilling, that moment where she turned. And I thought, wow, that's why she got best actress for this. I thought that was incredible. Do you remember that? Of
course. Of course.
Just the real her came out. It was scary.
Well, what was also chilling, if you know the film and you see it again, was when Jim visits them again in the countryside, and the camera is on the two men as they're on the porch outside the house. Then it pans to the left and there's this stunning shot of a lake, and it continues panning and it ends on Catherine's car parked outside.
Oh.
Ooh.
Right.
Once you've seen the movie, that takes on a whole new meaning.
Well, yeah.
But thank you, Jean.
There's a gun in the first part of the play. It's going to be shot by the end of that car was that vehicle.
There you go.
But boy, that scene of her in that bed when the light just turned, I thought, wow, that's acting.
Yeah.
She was great. Yeah.
Powerful. Okay. Thank you, Jean.
Thank you, Jean.
And to wrap it up, Marianne, our very own, your hand is up.
Mute, start video. It's really an anecdote I wanted to check with you guys. I read that he found the novel in the trash, François Truffaut. Is it true or not?
No.
Have you heard about it?
According to Truffaut, he was in a bookstore, and he just happened upon the novel in a bookstore and took it home and fell in love with it. So that was the story he told anyway.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne.
And while we're on there, let's throw it to Sean. And gentlemen, thank you for another great talk back. And here's
Thank
Sean.
you, everyone. Thank you, Dan.
Everyone have a great Sunday. Thank you. Enjoy the game.
hope for those of you that are in and around New York, or when you're visiting New York, that you can stop by and see us at the cinema. And pretty soon all of that will be available. Details will be available on our website.